We prioritize them learning about money. So they get allowance, and then I came up with this idea of magic envelopes. So they have these envelopes that basically operate like T-bills. They can put as much of their allowance as they want in these envelopes. But once you put it in, you seal it. So it's like buying a CD. And the interest rates are like insane. So I think they get
I'm using that.
I think they lock up for 6 months, they get a 50% return in those 6 months if they're willing to lock up their allowance for 6 months. Like they have whole systems that they've developed and then like my son will pay his sister to do things for him. Like the 6-year-old will pay the 3-year-old to do things. And like they've been doing this for like, I don't know, 6 months before we figured it out.
Welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. Today we have Ryan Delk of Primer Schools. I am so excited to chat with you, Ryan. I want to jump right in and ask you a question. Why should kids go to a small school as opposed to a big school? What's the advantage there?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Our belief on the structural advantage of micro schools is there's partially around the teacher to student ratio and how teachers are able to, when you're in a small school environment, there's so many things that happen at a 1,000-person school that just don't happen. It's almost structurally impossible for them to happen at smaller schools. And so when you think about things like cliques, bullying, all these influences that parents don't want to have on their kids, when you have a small school of 20 kids or 30 kids total, a lot of those things just can't happen, or it's very difficult for them to happen culturally. So you get a situation where the teachers are much more invested in the kids' success. You get a school culture that's much tighter knit and usually much more reflective of the values that parents want to see existed in their kids. And you get, in our case, this tech platform that Primer OS, the software that we built, that powers the school day in a way that's much more personalized for every kid. And so they don't feel like they're just a cog going through this, 1,500 student elementary school machine. They are, a member of their micro school, and they know that their teachers, their primary leader on site is bought into their success. Their parents are bought into their success. Their virtual teachers and tutors are bought into their success that they get access to through Primer. And so it's just a totally different experience day to day, being in a small school versus these sort of mass, elementary and middle schools.
That's so awesome. That's really exciting. Yeah. So I was talking with your friend, Chrisman Frank. We had a podcast with him a few months ago, and he made a really interesting point. There are some studies that show that even one other child can really mess up the learning dynamic. So because we have such a strong desire to please and make it sound like we're learning when we're not, that it's very hard to tell when learning isn't happening. So how does Primer address that issue? How do you make sure that children are actually learning instead of just saying, I got it, when they have no clue? We still do that as adults, right? Oh yeah, I got it, when you really don't.
Yeah, our system is pretty simple. It's actually, so my mom, 30 years ago, started one of the first micro schools in Florida back when, alternative education was like the total Wild West. And one of the things that she did for me at the start of every year is she basically put a piece of paper and she said, here's everything you got to learn for whatever, grade level you're on. And basically you can do this as fast or as slow as you want. I don't really care. If you get it all done in 3 months, awesome. If it takes you the full school year, fine. We can move on to the next grade as soon as you're done. But it was very transparent, and I still remember like where I was sitting when she handed me the piece of paper for the first time, because I felt like I was in the driver's seat of this thing. It wasn't this sort of abstract, infinite treadmill of work that I sort of like didn't understand, but I knew I had to work till May or June to finish. It was very concrete, and it was very specific, and it was a list of subjects or concepts that I needed to master, and there was very clear sort of guidelines for how that mastery was defined. And it was sort of like, here you go. This is your work for the next 9 months. And that's actually very similar to what we do at Primer. Kids log into their Primer dashboard and they see exactly what they need to get done for that school year, exactly how they're tracking against their own goals that they set and that their Primer leader set, against their grade level goals, depending on where they are from a grade level perspective. And they see it update in real time every single day, and their parents see the same thing and their teachers see the same thing. And so you don't wait 6 weeks for a report card. You don't wait, for a monthly test or exam. you have constant real-time feedback on how you're tracking. And most kids, even at a very young age, if you give them total transparency into how they're doing and show them what the goals are and show them how they're tracking, actually respond very positively to that. And we've had kids come in. I was talking to the mom of a student the other day who her student came in, was in third grade, couldn't read, was in the first percentile in, we'd use NWEA map tests, which are kind of the gold standard for academic, sort of understanding where kids are academically. Came in the first percentile, told his teacher, I got made fun of at my old school. I didn't know how to read, and I'm sick of it. I want to know how to read. And his teacher said, great, we'll put you on the remedial math test. You're going to have to work really, really, really hard. But if you're willing to work really, really, really hard, you can learn how to read. We can get you on to grade level. And he entered primer at the first percentile. And when we did the next, sort of assessment, which I think was 16 weeks in, he was on the 33rd percentile, and he was in the 99th percentile for growth. And he just came in every day, put in 2 or 3 hours of work on reading, and it was just, pure, just classic grit, like I'm going to get this done, whatever it takes. And he did it. And he had transparent, feedback, at every step of the way. His parents saw the progress every single day. And that doesn't happen in every case, obviously. But I do think that there's we're doing a disservice to kids by trying to obfuscate where they actually are in academic progress in the name of, sort of this emotional safety or something. And actually most kids are human beings that if you give them goals and transparency, they respond really well to it.
Yeah, it's like insane that our entire system that we all grew up with it doesn't incentivize like beating the standard, right? And if you're going to start a business or do anything of any high level, sports or music or anything, you have to push beyond just the standard, status quo. So it's kind of nuts that we condition kids to just like, oh, well, you can't move ahead because, Timmy over here isn't at that level yet. So, everyone gets kind of to the lowest common denominator, basically. It's insanity. Was your desire to get started with all this, did that have anything to do with kind of your upbringing and your background? And, what was your inspiration to start primer schools? Was it a personal experience or, walk us through that journey a little bit?
So I had this amazing education growing up. My parents made a ton of sacrifices for us. We moved to Central Florida. We were living in my grandparents' house. We were zoned for this F-rated school, elementary school. And my mom was actually a public school teacher, but she just made the decision that she's not going to send her kids to this school. I think we actually got to like kindergarten orientation. Like it wasn't like, I think she actually like went pretty far in the process. So this was not like some sort of preconceived thing where she was like, my kids are not going to public school, for our whole childhood or anything like that. But she basically did a 180 and decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands. And so she started this community in Florida, in Central Florida. And this was like the Wild West days of alternative education. This was not normal back then. And she basically started this little, home micro school thing for us and 5 other families, and it totally changed the trajectory of my life. Like no one will ever do anything to impact the trajectory of my life more than that. My parents made that decision when I was 5 years old because my mom was this incredible teacher, and so we had very rigorous academics, and she was not like unschooling. Like she was very structured and said like, hey, these are the academic goals. But then it was everything that she could make experiential. She made experiential, and so it was time to learn about the American Revolution. We saved up some money. She rented a van and we drove, to all the 13 colonies and went to see everything where, all the American Revolution sort of key moments unfolded. And to this day, I love early American history, and I, would assign most of that to the fact that I wasn't learning about it in a textbook. I was like, walking the path that Paul Revere, rode his horse as a 9-year-old, and that was, just created a totally different experience of learning that. And obviously you can't do that for everything, but when it was time to learn about the respiratory system, I remember she went to a butcher and convinced him to give her the cow lungs and brought him home in a cooler, and then shoved a PVC pipe into the esophagus so we could inflate and deflate the cow lungs and learn how lungs work to learn about the respiratory system. So there's just things like that she just went all in on, and it was this amazing education. And so when my wife and I started having kids, and we, wanted a sort of similar education for our kids, I was shocked that this wasn't, as I reflected more on it, I was shocked that this wasn't more normalized now. And then as I started to sort of talk to teachers and families and students, it was very clear that this was something that a lot of people wanted, and most importantly, that teachers wanted. Like, there's lots of teachers that, you wouldn't necessarily think about this intuitively, but there's actually lots of teachers that want to start their own schools, but that can't because it's so difficult. And so once it became clear that we could effectively help teachers become entrepreneurs serving their communities, and they know their communities better than anyone else, and you're really just converting. I love businesses or opportunities or organizations or nonprofits or whatever, where you're primarily just taking potential energy and converting it to kinetic energy. That's sort of the best thing that either a person or technology or anything could do, because you're taking something that's already a human desire, or something that, some people, there's some group of people that want to get activated, but there's some friction to them doing it. And if you can remove that friction, then all of a sudden it's sort of like a dam, and you're removing it, and there's just this huge sort of tidal wave of behavior shift. And so it became clear to me that was exactly what was going on with teachers. We had all these teachers that wanted to quit their jobs. They were sick of the bureaucracy. And if you could just free them up to be able to go serve their communities, they would love to do that. And that's effectively like the simplest distillation of what Primer does.
Yeah, it's such a brilliant way to kind of turn the system on its head, right? Because it just changes the incentives where, they're not overburdened by the bureaucracy. And then now they have the freedom to, one, tailor it to their local community a little bit better, but also they're incentivized to do a good job because they have to run it like a business. And then also the consumer, if you will, the students get their choice better, right? And, it just, everyone kind of starts to win in that equation, because it has to be held to a higher standard now. Because if it's no good, you're just going to go somewhere else. So
yep.
What a it seems so obvious when you state it like that, but I'm sure that when you got started, that was very difficult. I think Dustin has a great kind of segue off of that line of discussion there.
Yeah, Ryan, you mentioned a couple of things that some of our audience members might not be familiar with. Unschooling, I think that's the same thing as like free range parenting, right? Same kind of deal. If we could maybe go into that. What is the advantage to using a program like Primer School for kids instead of just going the homeschooling route?
Yeah. So unschooling and free range parenting are maybe orthogonal, but not perfectly overlap. So free range parenting, I think, is great, and that's much more of a parenting philosophy around how much you should be intervening into the daily lives of your kids, how much freedom and sort of leash you give them in the world. And we actually subscribe, not I would say wholesale to that, but we in our personal lives are big believers in a lot of those principles. Unschooling is the most extreme version of unschooling, or the steel man of unschooling, I guess is the more intellectually honest way to talk about it, would be that kids' innate desires are the most important things, and that you should prioritize them exploring those innate desires above everything else, and that's what their childhood should be spent on. And trying to cram in sort of specific academic goals is going to squash those desires, and you should just trust that eventually they will learn enough to become a well-rounded adult. And so a very extreme version of unschooling might be from K through 12, until they're 18. They literally can just explore anything they want, all day. So they, you could be in 6th grade and not really know how to do basic math if you were really interested in music and these other things. And so, sometimes people associate homeschooling or certain types of homeschooling with sort of some preconceived notion around unschooling, that it's this like highly unstructured thing. And actually, most homeschoolers, it's not the case. It actually is very structured and very academically rigorous, and that was my case. And to answer your question about Primer versus homeschooling, so I think homeschooling is incredible. It's just a very, very high lift for the parents. And so if you think about the sort of preconditions for effective homeschooling, it's typically a 2-parent household, because you're going to need one parent to work and one parent to stay home, which is increasingly rare. And then of that 2-parent household, one parent needs to be able to stay home. So the household needs to be able to survive on a single income, also increasingly rare. So we're just like kind of shrinking the pool. And then you have the parent that can afford to stay home, which needs to be probably the lesser income earner of the two, also needs to have a proclivity towards teaching or want to figure out teaching. And so you're just kind of like, shrinking and streaking down the funnel. And so what we found with Primer is that there's a bunch of people that wish their kids could be homeschooled or would love to homeschool, but for whatever reason, they don't sort of match all those, prereqs. And so Primer, I think a lot of people think of Primer as like the next best alternative to homeschooling, or like homeschooling for the masses, where, the reality is that most families in America need a place for their kids to go from 8 to 3 or 8 to 5 every day. And it needs to be a physical location that they can drop them off and pick them up while they're working. But ideally, they still have a lot of agency and time to explore their interests and all that. And so Primer kind of gives a little bit of the best of both worlds.
And can you just quickly detail a little bit like what a typical Primer school looks like, just for those who may not be aware?
Yeah, so we partner with really talented teachers. So often these are people that maybe they're even administrators. So they were teachers for a long time, became a principal. They may have won Teacher of the Year. These are kind of top of their game teachers who typically have been living in a community for a long time, so 10, 15 years. So they really know a community really well, and they want to launch a school for that community. And so we partner with them and we launch a Primer. They then recruit students, they help find a location, they recruit other Primer leaders, other teachers to that location, and then we'll launch a campus that typically has 3 Primers, 3 micro schools at the campus. So one for K through 2, one for 3 through 5, and one for 6 through 8. Each of those Primers then enrolls students and opens their doors. And typically they cap out around 30 students per Primer total. And so on a typical school day, you'll have rotations of students doing different things. So some students, based on their academic level, might be in advanced coursework that's delivered virtually because they're above the grade level that's happening in for a given subject in the actual physical location. Others might be getting remedial support or foundational support because they need additional support to get onto grade level. Others might be learning directly from the Primer leader. And so there's a Primer OS, which is the software that runs the whole experience that we've written in-house. It powers all of this. And so from a teacher's perspective, you come to Primer, you never do any paperwork. Everything that can be automated is automated for you. And so you can spend most of your time doing what you love, which is spending time with kids, building relationships, teaching, but in a much less intense environment in terms of you're not teaching for 6 hours straight every day. And sort of all this suffocating bureaucracy sort of just disappears overnight, and you can spend your days doing what you love.
That's pretty incredible, man. So I'm sure, obviously, you're aware of the election results this week, and I don't know if you saw Trump announce that he will be dismantling the Department of Education. So I guess my first question would be, 1, how do you think this is going to affect Primer? And then 2, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Department of Ed thing, I'll take the maybe contrarian take, which is I don't really understand the fixation with it at the federal level. Like the Department of Education basically is like a money routing system.
We interrupt this episode to talk about Synthesis Tutor, the world's first superhuman math tutor. It is warm, patient, and understanding, and adapts to your child so you never have to worry about them falling behind when it comes to math. In episode 84, we spoke to Chrisman Frank, the CEO of Synthesis, and immediately afterwards, I purchased Synthesis Tutor for my daughter, and it has been an absolute game changer for us. Math used to be a very painful experience. It was frustrating, and there was lots of tears for my daughter when it came to learning math. It's something she's not naturally good at, and we struggled a lot. Now she happily uses Synthesis Tutor every single week, and there's no more frustrating nights. The way it works is that it leverages AI to adapt the experience to your child to not simply master memorization of math facts, but it actually teaches the principles and concepts so that your child can independently solve problems without needing tons of outside help. Because it tailors the experience to your child, it is always adapting and learning where the child is in terms of their development, and it keeps them in the proximal zone of learning so that your child is being challenged but not getting frustrated or defeated by the experience. I am very pleased with our experience on Synthesis Tutor. My daughter's grades have improved in math. It's something that I can now outsource. I don't have to take the time myself to sit there and try and memorize facts with her. She gets excited to do it, and it's fun and engaging for her to learn instead of this frustrating experience, and it doesn't feel like a chore any longer. So we at the Present Fathers podcast highly endorse Synthesis Tutor. There is also a Teams function for those with multiple kids or maybe multiple families want to pool their children together. You can check that out on the website. You can get 10% off with your purchase by going to synthesis.com/PFP. That's synthesis.com/PFP. Go there, check it out, and start supercharging your child's learning experience with the power of AI. Back to the episode.
It doesn't really do anything at the federal level. It's mostly involved in higher ed, much more than K through 12. And to the extent that it's involved in K through 12, it's routing funds around. And I don't really, I don't know that it will change that much for that. I think it will be more efficient, which is great. I'm pro efficiency, but it certainly won't change anything for primer. We are not regulated by the federal Department of Education really at all. There's a few certain things, but it's mostly state law that private schools operate underneath. And I think that the funding can be distributed by the states. Things for like Title I schools, for example, that funding can be distributed. Free and reduced lunch, which comes from federal funding, those funds can be distributed by the states just as easily. So I think it's a good talking point, and I understand why it gets certain people really excited. But I think that maybe most people that get very excited by the headline would be surprised if they actually read through some of the operating reports on what the Department of Education actually does versus what they think it does, which I would imagine people think it's very involved in curriculum or these other things, and not just sort of moving billions of dollars around.
He also made an announcement about, especially for higher education, like you alluded to, really going after the accreditation system. I don't know how much you know about that. I don't really know a ton about it, obviously, but to me it sounded like a sound way to actually change the incentives, right? Like we spoke about earlier. You change the incentives, you kind of change a lot. I don't know if you saw that and if you have any thoughts on that, but I'd be curious because obviously this is a world a lot about, and it's kind of this rare chance we get to have kind of a, it's very pressing in the current, day and age right now. So I just love your thoughts on that.
I'm not an expert on higher ed. I will say in general, you can, the arguments that people make against these various structural gatekeeping, sometimes it's state regulation, sometimes it's federal, sometimes it's these sort of things like accreditation. They are almost all true. So in my experience for K through 12, and so it would be impossible to operate in the K through 12 space and not come to the conclusion, regardless of what your politics are, that there is a concerted effort on every side to ensure that new K through 12 options either can't exist or it's at least very, very difficult to get a new K through 12 option open at the local level. And so sometimes that's through accreditation, sometimes that's through land use and zoning, sometimes that's through state level Department of Education regulation. And if you want to go deep on any of those, I've spent way too much time on all of them. But that has probably been I sort of came into this thinking, okay, it can't be that bad. These things are probably just problems that you can sort of brute force and find ways to navigate within the system. And it is as bad as they say. It is certainly whether top down or at the individual level, there are thousands of little concerted efforts that have been made to make it very, very difficult for new K through 12 options to come online and compete with the traditional system.
So Ryan, since we're talking about money a little bit here, what does it cost per student at primer school versus what it would cost per student at a traditional public school? And then to dovetail on that, what do you think the maximum class size is where learning can still occur? Is it 10? Is it 20? We tend to see 30, almost 40 sometimes in some classes. What's the cutoff that's kind of ideal?
Yeah. So, if you look at the per pupil spending of public schools in the U.S., some cities cross $30,000 a student. And there's some schools that are spending, because they're so under enrolled but still funded, that are spending $35,000, $40,000 a student in some cities. So we can
annually, right?
Yeah, so it's annual cost per student. Yeah. We can educate. We can deliver an education that beats the traditional system very squarely by double-digit percentage points. Not percentages of growth, but actual points of achievement, academic achievement, for about half the cost of the traditional system in most of the areas that we operate. Now, and why I say so the way that just quick like 30-second lesson on school funding is the way that it works is the state basically sets per pupil funding formulas that exist in every district, which is like in Florida is like basically the counties, and then based on student attendance, there's a amount of money that they get per student for that student per school, and then there's additional funding that you can get on top of that. And so we sort of just look at those numbers and then figure out what percentage of that we're operating at. So yeah, class sizes. So it depends on if you're operating in the traditional system where it's a single teacher that's just lecturing a group of students and the age of those students. So I certainly think that if you took a top decile teacher who's just truly exceptional at a given subject, and for kids that are in upper middle school or high school, you could have 30, 40, 50 students like really engaged, like for example, like a math lecture that they were really excited about. But there's so many inputs that are going to go into that, which is like how motivated are these students? How excited are they about the subjects that they're learning? How do they understand the prereqs? Are they confused? Like there's all these inputs. But I think generally speaking, it's very difficult to go above 30 in that type of environment. At Primer, that type of environment basically doesn't ever happen during the school day, or is very, very rare. And so students are always moving through the school day in smaller groups. You can think about like every classroom being sort of subdivided based on academic level, interest, what kids are working on. And so the students are almost always working in some smaller subgroup of that, oftentimes virtually with other students across the Primer network. So they might be in a math class with students at 5 other Primers because they're all on that academic level and they need that specific math level. And so we have a exceptional math teacher that we've hired to help those kids at that math level, for example. And so it's just a totally different structure for how the school day works.
Yeah, it's I'm geeking out because I'm a budding entrepreneur myself, and I just love how you guys are just solving problems, right? It's like the mandate of all good business is to just solve pain points for people, right? And I love how some of these, it's at least it sounds simple. I'm sure the back work, the behind the scenes work to create some of these are probably not simple at all. But as for the user, right, the student and the parents, it sounds incredibly easy, right? The barrier to entry seems very low. I love that so much, man. But long term, what is the vision here? What is is it to completely replace traditional education? Is it to just be the best alternative? What is Ryan's vision for Primer? Let's say 10 years from now.
I mean, we have I believe that this model, I believe that the micro school model has a very significant structural advantage over the traditional system that allows you to deliver a better education at a lower cost and spin up new seats much more efficiently. So we can add a seat to the Primer network at about 1/10 of the cost of the traditional system, all in. So if you think about like the cost of, let's say, we do a lot of work in Miami. Let's say Mayor Suarez says, "Hey, we want to launch a new school. We need 1,000 new seats, for K-5 students in this area." They're going to then go find land, entitle the land, get the building built, go through zoning, build a $15 million building. And so by the time all that's done, they've taken 3 or 4 years and they've spent 10 times more than what we would spend per student. And so I think that advantage can allow us to get Primer to a very large percentage of the U.S. K-12 population. And the internal metric that we talk about on like a local level and then eventually a state and eventually a national level is what percentage of families live within 30 minutes of a Primer. And we think that we can get that to 80% eventually across the U.S.
Gotcha. I know a big barrier to entry, like you alluded to, right, with the homeschooling kind of dilemma is the household has to make enough, one parent has to be able to do it. I think even though Primer is probably very reasonably priced, right, in terms of what it offers and the value it creates based off that per student cost per year, right? That's still probably a pretty large barrier to entry to a lot of people. Is there do you even think it's possible that there could be like state funding that doesn't get in the way of controlling the, what is there a way to bridge that where we could eventually one day have a situation where maybe the government doesn't run schools anymore, but there's essentially a free option that's somehow funded, but still gets to operate kind of with that entrepreneurial spirit in mind to ensure that it actually doesn't just become the government again,
Yeah. So this is already happening. So Florida has a program that gives families about between $7,500 and $8,000 per year per student to attend schools like Primer, and so we have families that use that to cover most of their Primer tuition, substantial portion of their Primer tuition, and then we'll be announcing in the next few weeks that another state that is not Florida, we will be expanding to that state, and we're going to be working directly with the state government through some funding that they have put together to bring Primer to the state. That's going to almost fully, it'll fund about 96%, 95% of the tuition for families to attend Primer in partnership with the state government. So this is already happening, and this is, that is the future, I think.
That's crazy. Can you say who the state is? Just out of curiosity.
Not yet. But
Not yet.
soon.
Yeah, just curious. Just pushing that envelope. That's what I do.
The inside scoop,
It's his best friend. It's Gavin Newsom.
tweet.
That's why it's Gavin Newsom.
Yeah. I like to spill the tea, as they say. So, So would you say that it's worse or harder in other states than it is in Florida? And where are you guys currently besides Florida? Is there any other states besides the one that you can't mention?
We're mostly in Florida, Florida and Arizona. Florida is uniquely hard from a land use and zoning perspective. Most other states are much easier. So I think Florida in some ways was like playing on hard mode in terms of opening new schools. And then most of the other states that we've looked at that we'll be expanding to soon are much easier.
I'm actually surprised by that because, at least in the headlines you hear how like pro kind of alternative education Florida is, but that's the things that, like, as you're just walking us through this journey here, all those little facets you have to figure out with things like land use and zoning, right? I wouldn't have initially thought of that. And obviously there's just so many layers of bureaucracy, even when you're not operating in the government. So that's wild, man.
So here's a great soundbite for you. You can cut this out if you want, but so Florida has 2.5-3 million K through 12 kids. How many non-public schools do you think opened across the state on average the last few years? Any type of school, like micro school, big private school, in between, anything non-public.
1,000.
50?
200?
Justin's closest, but you all would have lost prices right. 38 on average per year.
Wow.
That's it?
So it's just, people don't understand that it's actually really, really hard to open schools. And so
That's wild.
That's what we're on track next year for Primer. Primer will probably account for 35% of all new schools open in Florida next year.
That's cool, dude.
Because there's just no one, it's just so hard to do. There's
crazy.
176
Nice.
plots of land in Miami-Dade County where you can open a school, and all 176 of them are full. So if you want to open a school, you got to find somewhere else, and you got to go through this crazy process. And so we changed state law in Florida twice, actually, to open up 50,000 new locations where you can open schools by right in every church, synagogue, performing arts center, library, community center across the state. And so now in those locations, you can open a school by right, regardless of what the local land use zone does. So we had to go to war to fix it, but we're making good progress.
Well, as a dad with 2 kids who are going to school in Florida, thank you for doing that. That's huge. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I was going to say, don't make me get on X and go after Ron DeSantis for you, man. I'll do it.
I love Suarez, man. He's awesome.
I don't know if you
he's
want
a
to
lot
take
of
that
fun
fight on, Justin.
Yeah.
Disney tried to go to war with DeSantis and soundly lost, so I don't think your odds are very good there.
I'm joking. I love him. We're on the same team. He's good.
Yeah, it's just, that's the thing, Ryan, like you're highlighting. We don't really, we take it for granted as just kind of like everyday people, right, who don't live in that world of how much behind the scenes goes into doing something like that. I'm sure even in other states that are, quote, easier, it's still probably just a massive effort just to get one open. So pretty crazy there. Is there anything else about Primer you really wanted to highlight? We want to make sure that we're fully sharing the beauty of what it is you've created with the audience.
No, it was good.
No,
good.
good?
Summer. Good
All
job.
right. That's it. Primer's perfect. Go check it out. With that, obviously, this is the Fatherhood podcast. We'd love to kind of talk that with you a little bit. So why don't you start and just tell us a little bit about your family, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we got 3 kids. Got a 7-year-old, or about to be 7-year-old, a couple days, and then a 4-year-old as of yesterday, and then a 5-month-old.
Well, happy birthday to whoever just had the birthday. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I got a 4-year-old who's
it was fun.
got a birthday coming up soon. So it's like birthday party season right now. I got invited. It was like 6 months of freedom, like no birthdays. And then all of a sudden I just got like 15 invites for the next 2 months. I'm like, no, every weekend is taken.
Dude, it's wild. We actually, just quick little caveat here. My daughter just turned 1, and we decided to do our gender reveal for our 3rd baby in her smash cake, and nobody knew. We didn't know the sex. We just knew that it was in the cake. And she starts smashing in this cake, and my son, we let him in there to get after it. And I start freaking out because it's a boy, and we're like, because that's what I wanted, was another boy to protect the girl, you know what I'm saying? And so it turned out to be exactly what I want. I start freaking out. Everyone's like, what is going on? And I'm like pointing at the blue, and I'm like, it's a boy. And they're like, wait, what? And then like everybody went nuts. So we had a 2-in-1 party, which was kind of fun and kind of neat idea. But yeah,
that's highly efficient.
Yes,
Trump
very efficient. Yes. It was making birthdays great again.
Yeah. Well, so with the army of kids that you've got going on and managing all of this, sounds like you're fighting state governments and other things like that. What is one of the biggest challenges you've faced in this journey of ensuring that you're still able to kind of show up for your family despite this, very important mission that you're on?
I think my view, I guess a couple thoughts. I don't know if they'll totally answer the question, but just sort of related, I guess. I think that you have to be very honest with yourself about opportunity cost. Time is finite. And so this idea that you can somehow, be a founder and be, a super perfect present father in the sort of like classic way I don't think it's like compatible. I think it's sort of this like delusional fairy tale land. And so I think about it a lot less of like, okay, how do I, sort of assuage my, the guilt that the world tries to put on me for working hard or something, and much more about one, am I consistently sacrificing other things outside of Primer to ensure that I am building strong relationships with my kids and having a very like deep relationship with them, and then 2, would I be proud of how when my kids are older and they look back and think about the fact that I was traveling a lot, or that I missed a soccer game or something. When they think about what I was working on, am I working on a noble quest that they would actually feel partnership in? And so I talk to my kids all the time about work. They know all about Primer. They know when we're opening new schools. They know, they have a very good sense for how things are going, what's going well, what's not going well. And my kids know when I'm traveling, what I'm traveling for, where I'm going, why I'm going there. They feel very bought into that. And so I think a lot more about when my son is, 25 and we're, I don't know, going to the Super Bowl together or something, and we're talking about his childhood. Is he going to think back and say, yeah, you worked really, really hard, but you made an impact on a lot of people's lives, and I wish, that you would have been, maybe you traveled, once every 3 months instead of twice a month or something. But I actually, I'm like really glad you did that, because there's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people that are, were directly impacted by that. And that's what I think about. And so the fact that I think Primer is a noble quest, and is something that is, that I think they'll be proud that I worked on, and that as a family, they sort of worked on. I think that is the most important thing to me. And then on the sacrifice point, I just don't really do anything besides Primer and my family. And so, requires waking up early, going to bed early, but I, try to get quality time with my kids every day. And I don't think you have time for, a lot of like hobbies and other things if you want to be present, have a bunch of kids, and run a company.
That's how I hoped you were going to answer that question, because that is kind of the trope, I think, is people think you in order to be a good dad, you have to basically just sacrifice everything and be at home all the time. And it's like, well, no. Because your kids should see that dad goes and produces. And to your point of like having a noble quest, there's purpose and meaning in that, right? And that, how are they going to learn that if you don't model it for them? So I love that. I've had to kind of balance that in my own journey as well. And, I think every dad can kind of relate on some level, regardless of what you do for a profession is, it's important to work hard and to make an impact. I love that. That's like one of my favorite mottos is impact over income, right? And generally, if you're focused on the impact of it, the income follows anyway. So, it's just kind of this pure and noble thing. So great answer, man. Appreciate that. I think Justin has a follow-up for you.
No, so I was going to say, like, kudos to you, man, because I'll tell you, I'm one of 4 boys, and my dad worked his ass off when I was a kid and traveled probably 6 out of the 7 days a week. There was a point that he worked 3 jobs. He fell asleep at the wheel and had to quit one of them because he was so tired, almost got hit by a school bus full of kids. He tells that story all the time to me, and he just was always an exceptional worker and just had an ethic like no one. And it translated to the gym, which is what's kept him alive. All the men on my dad's side of the family never lived past like 60, 65. And my dad's is the healthiest as a 20-year-old, and he can outdo most 20-year-olds in the gym, which is wild. So that being said, like George said, it set an example for us boys. And I have to say that every one of us has our successes. I mean, obviously we're all going to have our failures, but I don't have any resentment whatsoever, just from my point of view with my father, because yes, he traveled a lot, but he was doing what you're doing, which is, like George said, a noble cause, but he was building a legacy. He was leading by example, and he was doing the things that were important as a man and a family to provide. And I think your kids are going to understand that one day. They're going to look back and say, Dad sacrificed a lot. And if you love your children and they know you love them, they're going to understand that you sacrifice time with them to make their life better, which is so incredible, man. Like you can't say how appreciative they're going to be until you actually see it on their faces, because that's the conversation I have a lot with my father when he talks about the one thing he's proud about. He never missed a baseball game, because I was a big baseball player my whole life, and get me a little choked up. But that being said, I think you're doing the right thing. You are impacting so many people's lives, and you're giving parents the opportunity to give their kids an education that otherwise they wouldn't have. You're giving, families opportunities to create generational change. And if your kids can't be proud of that, then I don't know what's right or what's wrong. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Just my 2 cents. Thought I'd give you a little encouragement there, because that's pretty baller, man.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So Ryan, with your incredible educational background with your mom, who I'm curious, because I grew up in Oviedo, Florida. I'll bet we were kind of near each other in some way. That's really funny, that small world there. So is there anything you do as a dad, not as a teacher, but specifically that you teach your kids that you think is really special that maybe you could pass on to other dads? Is there anything unique or something that you see yourself doing that you don't see other dads doing?
That's a good question. I mean, we like really prioritize independence a lot and let them make their own decisions on things. So we were traveling this weekend, and my son and I were picking up some breakfast for my wife and my daughters, and we went out to this coffee shop that was sort of nearby our hotel, and my son's 6, about to turn 7, and he was like, I think I want to go back to the room, and I was like, yeah, no problem. And so he just went back to the room, and I got like weird looks from a lot of people that I was sort of like letting my son just leave this coffee shop, and it was like totally safe environment. Like he was walking back, it was like a probably 2-minute journey back to the room. But I think at 6, a lot of people will be like, it's a little, that's I'd probably still want to escort them back or whatever. So we really prioritize independence. We prioritize them learning about money. So they get allowance, and then I came up with this idea of magic envelopes. So they have these envelopes that basically operate like T-bills. And so there's like 3 different interest rates, but they're associated with different lockup periods. And so they can put as much of their allowance as they want in these envelopes, but once you put it in, you seal it. So it's like buying a CD. And so they can, and the interest rates are like insane. So I think they get,
I'm using that.
I think they lock it up for 6 months. I think if they lock it up for 6 months, they get a 50% return in those 6 months if they're willing to lock up their allowance for 6 months. And so obviously it's like a big deal for a 6-year-old who wants to buy a Lego set or whatever.
It's a lot of money.
So that's one thing we do that maybe most people don't do. But they totally like they have whole systems that they've developed and then like my son will pay his sister to do things for him. Like the 6-year-old will pay the 3-year-old to do things, and like they've been doing this for like I don't know 6 months before we figured it out. And then the 3-year-old obviously likes getting money so she can go do things. So we don't shy away about money at all. And then we have certain things that are just that we want to be unlimited and just create like a total treadmill on for our kids. And so books are one of those things. We will basically buy them. We're fortunate to be in a financial position where we can, if they want any book, we will always buy it for them every time. So we always go into bookstores. If we pass a bookstore, we always buy books. And there's not a lot of things where that's the case for. We are pretty limited in terms of what we buy for them outside of that. But it's basically unlimited books. And then what else do we do? It's weird. Oh, I bought my son a copy of the 1914. So he always like has questions about like what words mean. And I didn't want him just like on the internet, when he was younger, like just Googling words. And he's a total bookworm, so he reads for like 2-3 hours a day. And so he's asking us constantly, like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And so I found out that in 1914, Webster's put out an elementary school dictionary, which is like sort of a smaller version, and you can still find the original versions of this, but it's smaller, it's kind of easier to handle, and it's like a third of the words that are in the full Webster dictionary. But there's none of this like sort of modern BS in it. It's just the original words from 1914. And it's for elementary school kids, so they've taken out all the words that would have things that would cause confusion and have them asking about sex and all this other stuff. And so we got him a copy of that, and so now whenever he gets to a word that is no, he just goes and grabs this this like rugged leather like 1914 dictionary off the shelf and flips through it and finds the word and then learns how to do it. So I don't know how unique those things are, but we're sort of all in on the helping them if they're interested in something and excited about it. It's sort of like we want to create a treadmill for them to go as far and as fast as they want.
That's awesome, man. And speaking of, I was gonna say, speaking of treadmills, when you said that, it sparked my imagination. Have you done anything for physical fitness or health for them? And like anything that kind of rewards that?
Yeah, so I work out every morning. So our morning routine is like I wake up, work out, and then I'll come up kind of right when they're waking up. And so they see me coming back from my workout every day. And then they'll then often ask on the weekends if I'm working out like later in the day to join me. And so they'll often work out with me. And then we make breakfast together every morning with me and my kids. And they've totally internalized like the importance of protein. And so I don't know how many we go through, probably
Wins
50 eggs a week or something, or 60 eggs a week as a family. But they'll literally say, like, we'll be at dinner with friends, and my 5-year-old or my 6-year-old will say something like, I think I'm not going to eat any more of these carbs because I think I need some more protein. And the table will just sort of like get silent. But they've totally internalized like a lot of the things that and not because we've sort of like pushed it on them, but just because they've seen it modeled. And we just try to involve them in a lot of stuff. And so we just treat them like tiny humans that are, my wife and I got married, we made the decision, we said we're not going to reorient our lives around our kids. We're going to welcome our kids onto the journey of our family. And they're joining with us, and we're have a vision for our life and for the world and the world we want to create for ourselves and for others, and we're welcoming them into that journey. And so that's been our posture in parenting, in tiny things like, hey, let's make breakfast together and you're welcome to join, but we're not changing what we're making for breakfast because of you, and we're going to still do our thing and you can join if you want. And then also bigger things in terms of how we approach their activities and stuff. But that's just always kind of been our posture in parenting.
Dude, that's legit, man. So I was just going to throw in, so my dad used to do with us when we hit high school to help us to put on some muscle mass, because we were 6'3", 6'4", and 90 pounds soaking wet, and he was tired of seeing it. So he was like, every time you go to the gym, I'll give you $5. And so every time we went to the gym, and it started accruing to a point where he was like, all right, I can't keep giving you $5 because you guys are coming every time. So then he started like, all right, get this PR or beat me in this. And eventually, I think it was senior year, I deadlifted more than him. And I was like a pretty beefy dude at the time. and he gave me $500, and I was like, yeah, I was bragging on my boys. So yeah, it's funny you said that. So, but I did want to say something else. I read a study recently that talked about brain elasticity and IQ, and it said that if you feed a child two eggs every day for a year, their brain elasticity goes up 45%, and supposedly their IQ on average is a gain of like 32%. I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but that's the number I remember in my head. So
is that because of the choline or what?
I want to say it's probably a mix of the choline and the protein. Just because kids probably don't get enough.
Eat the eggs.
Yeah.
Eat the eggs doesn't matter why.
Yeah, just eat the eggs.
No, yeah, it's from the yolks. Yeah, the egg whites aren't what's doing it. It's the choline and the yolk part for sure.
Nice. Wow, learn that.
Nature superfood.
Yep.
I love the idea of kind of like teaching them money, right? For some reason, money, there's this like taboo thing, right? We have these weird conceptions about it, and it's, this is something I've learned a lot in the last couple of years just from my mentors, is like it's a tool, right? You can use it to make impact and do great things with it, or it can rule your life, right? And so we should start teaching our children that at the earliest possible age. So yeah, we do the same thing with like our daughter. She can get money and whatnot, and like, well, no, you don't need this thing. So if you want this, you're gonna have to buy it with your money. So like, oh, her $25 just disappeared. That stack is a lot lower. Like, she feels the pain of that a lot more. I get excited about the fact that like my goal is to kind of build things up to a point where in the next couple of years, when she's like 13, 14, I can basically grant her an investment to start a small business to operate, part-time digitally from the house. Really to put her in position to be making good money before she's even out of high school, so that whatever she decides to do, she has like this mastery over producing without having it like be a full-time job. And I get excited about that too, with kind of the onset of AI and all the implications that may have on kind of just fundamentally changing things. I think it's something dads need to be very diligent about, because training our children to think that way is really going to set them up to absolutely dominate the future compared to their peer group. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? I know that you're probably eyeing implications of AI as it relates to primer already, but just any thoughts you had around ways that dads could think creatively there?
Yeah, my kids are obsessed with ChatGPT, and they actually, they asked me, they're asking ChatGPT for riddles, and then when they ask me for a riddle, they ask me for a dad GPT riddle, and they think it's hilarious, which is like dystopian in some sort of bizarre way that I haven't quite totally wrapped my head around. Yeah, we use AI all the time. Like, my son's obsessed with F1, like to a level that almost seems impossible. And so
who's his favorite driver? Hold on, time out. Who's his favorite driver?
Lando Norris.
Oh, nice. He's smart.
I can respect that.
I can respect that.
That's cool.
He's a great driver.
Max Verstappen.
Verstappen's a psycho, man. I've never seen anyone drive like that, man. He has literally no fear. I love him.
Yeah, he hates him. But so I used ChatGPT, and I said, hey, can you create a bunch of fourth grade math problems for a student that loves F1? And it's actually great at this. And so his math work that he does is like these F1 worksheets where it just like puts together, Lando's like this many points behind in the drivers' championship. There's 6 races left. How many points does he need to average in Vegas? And these 4 races in order to take the lead before race 5 or whatever. Math on pit stops, tire wear, really all this stuff. So it's actually, I think it's amazing. We use it a lot, or we're starting to use it more at primer. But that's probably the thing that the hallucination still rate is too high for solving problems. Like it's very good at asking, and the problems are almost always constructed well and solvable. But then asking it to work backwards and say, okay, now solve this problem and tell me why I'm wrong or where I got it wrong. It struggles with. But we use it a lot on that. And then, yeah, to your money question, I totally agree. We want our kids to understand money as a tool, and it's something that can do a lot of good in the world, and you can spend it, save it, give it away, and so we want our kids to feel ownership of that, even at very small levels when they're kids with allowances, and then when they get older, be able to be responsible for much larger amounts.
I love that, man. That's really the F1 thing is really cool, and what you're highlighting there too is I think we've heard this a lot from like really great dads on the show is like find the things your kids are excited about and find creative ways to kind of pair them with learning and something they love, right? So you're obviously taking your son's love of F1 and making it kind of a math, learning experience too, having to, figure that out. So that's genius. Love that so much, man.
I was going to say, if there's like a core memory or something since you've become a father that just really sticks out in your mind when you think of this question, what would that time or memory be that has to do with your kids?
There's a like this blessing that I pray over, or usually I sing it actually, kind of with my two older kids, and we'll often sing it, before they go to bed or just during the day if we're together. And when my youngest daughter was born, and she was crying, she was probably 3 weeks old, and she was crying, my 6-year-old came in and just put his hand on her head and started singing that same blessing that I had sung to them like hundreds of times. And that was probably like, and she immediately stopped crying and just was like staring at him and listening to him sing. And that was probably, there's so much wrapped up in that for me of like how much he had internalized that like this was a calming thing for him. And then him now assuming the posture of this older brother that was there to comfort, his younger sister. And something we never even talked about, explicitly. I've never told him like, go sing this to her when she cried. Like that was never even, it was just totally, instinct. And that'd be hard to top that one.
Damn. I'm not going to lie, man. You got a little choked up. That's probably one of the best answers we've had on that question, beautiful. Man. That was beautiful. Seriously.
Yeah, somebody's cutting onions in here, but we're
but see, that's just such a great example of when you, as a father, kind of set the tone, right? We had a guest, Travis Ritchie, said that when dad gets home, he sets the tone, right? So what kind of tone are you fostering in your household? That is a prime example of you being intentional and loving as a father. Your son is already picking it up at 6, man. That is. Yeah, if that doesn't warm your heart, I don't know what to tell you. That's amazing. Yeah. Dustin, I think you had one, right?
Yeah, that was beautiful. So last question, give us one piece of dad advice. That's our favorite thing to do as dads, is to give advice. What advice would you give to other dads?
Someone told me before we had our oldest, he said, he told me he had older kids, and he said, there's going to be a lot of hard moments. There's going to be a lot of times that you want to, you're on your phone or you're, distracted, or your kid's having a meltdown or whatever. And just know that there will be a time 20 years from now where you would give enormous sums of money to go back to that exact moment just for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, for one last hug with your, 3-year-old, or one last bedtime story that you got to read them, or, whatever the thing is. And I think about that all the time. When I often pick up my phone to respond to an email when I'm in the middle of going for a walk with my kids, or my daughter's, frustrated about something, and my instinct is to think, why are you getting frustrated about this? This is so silly. Like, come on, just let it go. And I just think about, okay, how, there's going to be a day where I would give anything to be back in this moment right here. And so I don't know if that's helpful for other people, but that's been incredibly helpful for me, for taking me out of the moment and thinking a little bit more meta about how I want to respond or how I want to engage, and really giving me perspective, especially in the harder, times where you're tired and stressed and, all the normal things that you encounter as a parent, to maybe show up in a way that you'd be a lot more proud of 30 years later.
It's sound advice, man. And, I think when you think that way too, it makes it easier to kind of maintain your stoicism in those moments too, because you're counting the cost of, this one little moment really isn't that important. I should, kind of cherish it for what it is. So I love that, man. Great advice. All right, it's primer.com. That's where to check out the schools. What is, the best way to follow you or engage with you, or they just go to the website and kind of fill out, get started? What's the best way?
Primer.com. If you are a teacher that's interested in launching a school, we'd love to hear from you. My email is at primer.com, just the letter R, primer.com. And if you're a parent that's looking for a better education option for your kid, also love to talk to you, share more about Primer, introduce you to our team. And I'm on Twitter at Delk. It's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me publicly.
Nice.
Awesome, man. Any last thing you want to plug or share with us before we wrap it?
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for sharing. I love what you're doing, giving better options to parents and kids. And we hope that you are highly successful and that we can get this spread across the country. I think it'll be amazing for the future. So appreciate what you're doing and for your whole team and all the work I'm sure that goes into this. And thanks for sharing your story with us. All right,
thanks,
with that, dads, let's get climbing the mountain of fatherhood. We will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you're on YouTube, drop a subscription to us. And if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. It helps greatly. If you are also ready to level up as a man, check out Elite Sentinel Coaching, our program designed specifically for men, where we forge men into leaders. We turn cowards into kings, weaklings into warriors. Become the hero in your story. Join us today.